All right, and welcome back, guys. In this video, I wanted to go over some of the camshaft things for your smaller engines and maybe some cam sizes and some cam deals. So stick around. One of the things I'll tell you in the beginning is the weak point on a Volkswagen, in my opinion, is the camshaft. I mean, these stock cams were really low performing. They really didn't have much duration in them, and very little lift. And because of that, they were meant for, gas mile, or not gas mileage, well, somewhat gas mileage probably, but also for emissions and stuff like that. So anyway, the biggest performance upgrade you can do to a Volkswagen without spending a lot of money, and people always go for cylinders, they go to pistons and cylinders, they go for bigger engine. Really, the biggest bang for your buck is right here. Camshaft and increasing the compression. A camshaft and take the compression up to 8.25 to 1 can make a huge difference in the power of your Volkswagen. So we're going to talk about the smaller size engines up to maybe a small 2-liter. Anything bigger than that, they run into a bigger engine, requires a larger cam. But doing too big of a cam can actually be a problem, because what can happen is you're putting the power all at the top end. Like, the larger the cam, the more the power wants to be at the top end. So you want something bigger than the stock one, but maybe not too big. So we're going to kind of go over those ideas in numbers. It's never a bad idea to learn how to measure a cam. I do have a video on that. Maybe I'll stack it at the end of this one. And what it does is when you measure your cam, you're lifting your duration. Remember, a camshaft, all the duration numbers are figured out on crankshaft rotation. So if you measure the cam and you figure out that it's way different than what you think, you probably should be checking, making sure that it's at crankshaft rotation, which is twice the cam rotation, just so you know. So you might measure, 110 degrees of duration here at 0.050, and it's actually 220, okay, because you're doubling that number. So it's a good idea to know how to measure your cam lobes and make sure that you've got what you think you're getting. One of the things I'll tell you guys in the beginning, one of the cheap things to do, and it works, is to get one of the reprofiled stock cam. They'll take a stock cam and then they regrind it to, they call it a W100 or a W110. And really what it is it may not be measured out exactly that. So those ones, it's a good idea to measure it and then find out if you can get to these numbers that we're going to talk about later, and by using ratio rockers or whatever. But you want to know what your cam has on it, the profile, lift and duration, so you can do that. So what we're going to do is I'm going to show you about how that the cam specs work, because you'll see a lot of different numbers on them, and it's kind of confusing to some people, but it isn't really once you get to know how they work. One of the things you may not know is the stock rockers for 1600, for the 40 horse, they are 1.0 to 1. Everything else is ratio rockers for Volkswagen. So the 1600s were 1.1 to 1 ratio. So what you're going to see when you look at the cam specs, so this is for a W100 Engel, because it's a common cam. We're going to use it as an example. So you look here and it says that the actual cam lift is 383. Okay, that's at 1.0 to 1. Okay, now with 1.1, so this is 420 lifted with 1.1 stock rockers. All right, and 276 degrees of advertised duration. So when you measure your cam, let's say you measure it, you should be measuring it at 0.50 to 0.50. So what you do is you turn the cam around till it's at 0.50. That's just starting to lift at 50 thousandths up. And then you go turn it all the way around till it's 50 thousandths on the ramp down. And that's your total duration that you're going to be able to measure. You cannot measure advertised duration. It's there's no actual way, but what you'll find out is when you look at most cam specs, they go by advertised duration. They don't go by the 0.050. This is how you measure it with 0.050. So it's good that they have this on here, but what you're always looking at is the advertised duration, which is 276. So you'll see a lot of cam specs that don't show the 236 at 0.050. That's why I like the air-cooled website. They kind of show some of that stuff. But if you look on the Samba, you're going to see this number alone, okay, the 276. You will not see the 236 at 0.050, which is the way you measure it. So what I do is I'm measuring cams. If I'm going to measure the one that's in it, I'll check the duration at 0.050, and say I come up with 236, and I'll go, oh, it's probably going to be around a 276 duration. Okay, follow how I'm doing that? And that's just to help you understand how you can convert this to that. All right, so if you're going to measure your cam, the way you measure your lift is a dial indicator on the valve. Turn the engine over and watch the dial indicator come all the way up from 0, go all the way back down to 0, and the total lift at the top, the highest point, is your valve lift. So that's your valve lift. Okay, and that's going to be your what's that called? They have a couple different ways to explain it. Cam lift is going to be one thing, the valve lift is the other. So if you look here, the actual cam only has a 283 lift, but it says valve lift of 420 because it's spec'd out for 1.1 rockers. So if you're using 40 horse rockers, you're going to come out at 383. If you're using 1600 rockers, you're going to come out at 420. So it's a good idea to measure it after you put it in so you know what you're really getting. Now, none of this stuff is rockets. None of it's like, I'm not putting complete science into it. There's other reasons why you need this, but typically most of your cams around, I'm going to say above 360, 350 lift in there somewhere. I don't know the exact number, but you're going to need a single high rev spring to be able to get it to return properly, because otherwise it won't follow the profile of the cam. It may float a little bit when it goes over the cam lobe. So if you have a larger cam, you need at least single high rev springs. When it's around, I'm going to say around 440 is kind of the area where you can look at the specs and kind of determine this for yourself. This is just what I've determined, is when it's around 440, that's when you're going to probably need dual springs. So if you don't need dual springs, it's better if you don't run them. And the reason why that is because all that spring pressure is going to beat up your valve train. The same thing with running a straight cut gear set. If you're thinking it just sounds cool, I want to put on a straight cut gear set, you know what happens is that is like a supersonic that vibration from that will cause tons of wear all over your engine that's unnecessary for the street. So it's better to run the ones that are, like this here, because they actually do less wear in the engine. The reason that you need to run, when you need to run one of those straight cut gears, is when you have too large of a cam and it's putting a lot of pressure on your thrust bearing. So the other thing you do whenever you upgrade your cam is you should put on a dual thrust bearing, because you have more. The stock ones didn't have a lot of thrust, they didn't have a lot of lift or duration, and so it didn't create much stress on the side of the bearing. So that's why they had a single thrust on them. When you're putting a performance cam in, you always go to the dual thrust. So let's talk about some cam numbers that work and some that don't. Okay, if you stay in the range of, I'm going to say up to, 430 is kind of pushing it for a stocker type engine. That's too big on the lift. But if you're in about a 400, okay, lift, and you're at a beat between 265 and 275-ish, you could go to 77, I'll show you later. On the duration, that cam is going to work well with a lot of the smaller engines. Now, you can go smaller on the lift than that too. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But if you're in that target range of 400 lift and 265 to 275 duration, it's going to work pretty well on a smaller engine, even on a 1600. So, but if you don't want a rougher idle, you want a smoother idle, then you can go with less lift and achieve that. Anybody price conscious? I think a few of you guys are, like me. Let's look at price conscious cams. Scat C20. Okay, and we'll look at it on air-cooled net. It's about 85 bucks. Okay, if you're looking for a cheap cam that wants to work good, Scat C20. I like the C25 better, personally. But you'll look here, and it says with 1.1 or 1.25 rockers. So this one can be used as what they call a cheater cam, okay, which is you just run stock rockers on it, and you have a 350 lift with 1.1s, okay, and your duration is 277. So like I said, you go a little bit above the duration, where I was talking about the 277 is fine, okay. And then what you can do with the same cam is you can upgrade it to a 400 lift and by putting 1.25 rockers. We call them 125s. We're just going to call them 125s from here on out, 1.25 rockers. So you put a set of 125s on it. Now it's in that sweet spot range for performance, even for a smaller engine. If you're willing to spend a little more money, one of my favorite cams is the Web 86. Let's look at that one. It's a lot more money, okay? It's almost $100 more. At CarCraft has the best price on these cams, by the way. If you're looking for a webcam, CarCraft has the best price, guaranteed. I looked around. They're way cheaper than everybody else. That's because webcam's in Riverside. And CarCraft in Riverside. So what they have here is with 1-to-1 rockers, stock rockers, it's 358 lift, 270 degrees of duration. With 1.25s, I have one of these with 1.25 rockers, and with 125s, it's 406 lift. And yeah, I do have a pretty rough idle with a single carb, but it sounds bitchin'. Okay, I like the way it sounds, so that's okay to me. Let's take a look at this poor man's version of the Web 86. This one is, we'll get to, you got a better place than that. Air cooled. Okay. Poor man's version is the Scat C25. So you end up with 125s with stock rockers. Now this is what's cool about this cam, is with stock rockers, it's 365 lift. So you'll have a really smooth idle with that. A really pretty smooth idle if you run stock rockers. So if you say, hey man, I'm just going to build an engine for now. Later on, maybe I'm going to go ahead and put dual carbs on it. So I'll, put this cam in, which can work pretty well with stock rockers. And so you've got 272 degrees of advertised duration, which is, to me, spot on. Okay. And then with 1-to-1 rockers, you go up to 415 lift. Or with 125s, you go to 415. So this is actually a pretty sweet cam right here for dirt cheap. If you're looking for a cheap cam, I like this Scat C25. If I was buying another cam today and I didn't have the Web 86, that's probably what I would buy personally. So like if you look at Scat's website, cam, lightweight lifters, gear, and an oil pump for $200. You really can't beat that, guys. That's cheap. So you can get the whole deal from them and get a pretty good deal on it. Or if you want to go old school, you can go to the W100 Engel. Great cam. If you look at the specs on those, they're 420 lift. It's actually a pretty aggressive cam. A lot of people think that the 100's just not that big, but I never really used to look up specs on these things like I do now. And 276 degrees of duration, or is that what it is? Yeah, advertised duration. So that's what you're going to look at. Remember, the advertised is the one that everybody lists. So yeah, you can have one of those. You could even probably, if you wanted to, and it doesn't say it on here, but if you wanted to tame it down a little bit, it probably would work with 40 horse rockers. Never tried it, but that might be pretty cool to tame it down. You have a 280 or 383 lift and 276 duration, kind of like that comes out. Doesn't that come out just a little tiny bit bigger than the Scat C25 without ratio rockers? Some food for thought. I'm just throwing these things out here for you guys. These would probably all work pretty well. The W100 is a go-to, long-term go-to. So anyway, well, let's go back here. Let's look at the W110. Engel 110 cam. So you guys, this is the benchmark, right? Engel 110. This is what everybody, these were pretty big. So 430 lift. They still run with the single high rev springs, 284 degrees of duration. So that's quite a bit of duration, quite a bit of lift. I don't know. I don't think I'd want to try and run this. Well, it might work with 40 horse rockers. I don't know. It'd be interesting to try. Anybody tried it? Put a link or put a comment below. Be interesting to see how that would work. Might be. It's a lot of duration. Probably get some valve overlap with that. They always have these. CB has these cheater cams. They're a little bit more expensive than the Engel. The Engels are around 100-ish, I think. Depends on where you go. I think they're around 100 to 115, $120. These are 150. And the specs on these, so 2280, let's look that up. So this is something guys like to use because it's a lower, smaller engine cam. So it's 359 lift, 274 duration. Does that sound familiar, guys? Isn't that really close to the C25? The C25, a little more lift, a little less duration. So you can use this so what I'm saying is the cheater cam is kind of like a good one for a stock engine. So if you got a stock engine, you don't want to do a lot of compression upgrades to it. Let's see what it says. Compression. 8. So stock compression is 7.5. So you really, any of the cams, they want to see you bump the compression up to 8.25. So this was to 8.4. So yeah. Now what's cool is you could take the one, so it doesn't show here if you put 125 rockers on it, but I bet you anything just from, if it's above 240, I think, or 440, that they're going to say dual springs required. So you want to keep that in mind if you're going to use a cheater cam and then put ratio rockers on it. Some of the cheater cams you can, some of them you can't. So another one that gets overlooked a lot, and I'll tell you why, is the Engel 90. I don't really like the cam much, but the Engel 90, if you have one, they do work. So if you look here, it has a cam lift of 295, which is basically stock. And then you've got, well, actually, it's a little bit more than stock. Stock, the valve lift is around 295 or 300. And then from what I've read, I really don't know what the stock ones are 100%. But the degrees of duration is 265. So that's pretty good duration. Like I said, the biggest, weakest point on a VW is duration is terrible on the stock cams. It's around 225 advertised on those. So there's just not enough duration in there. So this one's got 265 duration. With stock rockers, you only end up with 325 lift. It's kind of small. It would give you some more power, but I'll tell you, if you get something that's around 350 lift and 265 duration on a stock engine with a little bit of increase in it's going to give you some more power. Honestly, I like a little bit bigger than that. So this one with 125s on it, I think it's close to, I forget what it is. Anybody got a clue on that? It's close to 400. It's like 390 or something. I don't know what it is. But it's closer to 400. And then you have 265 duration. So you could use this one with 125 rockers on a stock engine. And it would give you some pretty good power. So that could be done. So if you've got an Engel 90 in yours, or you know that's Engel 90 and you're going, man, it's kind of sludgy, you can throw some ratio rockers on it. It'll come alive. So just a few ideas. I'm just throwing these out there for you. This isn't like the rule of thumb. This is just to kind of get your mind thinking about cams and about how to read the specs and, things that work. So what happens if you go too large in your cam? None of these are going to be really way too large, okay? When you go way too large, I'm talking about like an Engel 120 or 125, 130 on a stock engine. All that's going to happen is you're going to use a lot more gas, and you won't have probably even as much power as a stock one. So you can, but what'll happen is if you do have power, it's going to be so far in the RPM range that you're never going to get to those RPMs. And so if you put your cam specs to where they're too large, you end up having to have, 6,000, 7,000 RPMs for the cam to actually start to work. And the problem with that is, to get to those RPMs, you're going to have to go with forged pistons. You're going to have to go with H-beam rods. You're going to have 100 pounds of oil pressure, 70, 80 pounds, 90 pounds of oil pressure. You're going to have all the stuff and probably a $2,000 crankshaft, stuff that's going to get you to that range. So a lot of guys will screw up and they'll get too big of a cam, and, you end up just, building something that doesn't work right. So here's the key thing. Again, the smaller engine, 400 lift, is about where you like to be, with between 265 and 275-ish duration. Somewhere in there. If you stay in those things, you're probably going to be fine. If you want a smoother idle, lower lift, we'll do that. So like there's ones that are like, if you're saying, hey, I don't want too much rough idle, but I want more power, there's one that was like 260 lift, 270 lift, somewhere in there, and 265 to to 75 duration. You know, it's not going to idle that rough, and it'll give you a lot more power. So those are kind of the theory behind all that in the smaller engines. And you'll find that all the ones, if you read all the stuff on them, they'll say stuff like 5,000 RPMs. That's a basic thing. If you start porting the heads and you go with bigger valves, you know, and if you're using a smaller engine with big valves, then you're going to want to go smaller on your cam, because you're going to have too much air and fuel in there, or you're going to have to bump the compression way up to like near 9-to-1, and then you're going to lose, you know, heat is going to be an issue. Man, you can run 9-to-1 with basically, you know, if you have a big enough cam, you can run 9-to-1 on the street, and as long as you're running premium fuel, it'll work. But it will have that point where if you're flooring it all the time, it can get hot. Like if you're going up big long hills, it can get hot. But I've got an engine that's at 9-to-1, and it's amazing. Other than on a long hill, I just can't stay in it. I have to let off the gas and let it. And then once I crest, I have dual coolers. I have a doghouse fan shroud and a second cooler, and the oil just cools the engine down along with all that air from the doghouse and the big fan. It cools it down pretty quickly, and also the what are they called? Cool tin, super cool tin, which work, by the way. And it cools it down quick enough right away, and I'm able to jump on it again after I crested the hill. About 5 minutes of being easy on it, and I can get back into it. It's fine. So you can run and that's in a bus, so you can run higher compression and still do it, but you just have to be aware that if you're pushing it too hard, you're going to get hot. Like when I'm going out to the desert, I got it a little too hot, and then all my valves got tight, you know, so that happens too. And that's because I have them all set at 0. So anyway, because I have Chromoly push rods, so it can set it at 0 then. But anyway, that way, yeah, they all got tight a little bit. The heads got a little loose, had to tighten the heads, you know, stuff like that happens when you get too hot. So if you don't want to mess with that, you know, go a little bit lower in the compression, 8.5, even 8 3/4 still. It's still pretty well doable for the street. And with the performance cam, it just helps it fire that air and fuel that's in there. Anyway, I thought you guys enjoy this kind of thing. It seems like a lot of people like these kind of videos. Be sure to like the video if you do, and then share it wherever you want, and subscribe. And of course, leave a comment if you have a cam that you like, and put the engine size that you use with it and the compression ratio, so that everybody kind of knows the whole scene. And carburetors, if you have that, and ported heads or whatever. Put the whole picture so that everybody can see what you got that works. All right, I'll talk to you in the next one. Please like, share, and subscribe.